Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the November 2024 online talk for Castle Studies group members. I'm very excited to have Will Davies from Cadw with us today, talking about Newport Castle. I got a small preview of the content yesterday, and you're in for an absolute treat. Newport is a fascinating place. I think we're going to be learning an awful lot today. Now, Will, over to you.
Okay. Well, I've recycled the title tonight from a local history society who wanted a title with a subtitle. And then they edited mine out. I tried to be too clever. Who, when, and why was the official line that they gave me to work from, and kind of fits what we're talking about tonight, really. If you look at Cadw's website, it tells you this is a building built in the 14th century by the Earls of Stafford, then massively remodeled by Humphrey Stafford, the Duke of Buckingham, these great big windows, the upper level, probably dating his tenure. And that's a sort of line that's been taken ad verbatim from sort of source, probably the sort of late 60s, early 70s. This idea started coming through. But there's absolutely no back into it. But 15 years ago, Cadw paid me as a contractor, and then doing building surveys, amongst other things, and with some Ryder Cup golf money to look at the castle. It was a very tenuous piece of funding, really, sort of a golf tournament. Look at the castle about 4 miles away, with the brief from the late great Rick Turner. Tell me how old it is. Why did they build it? So that's what we'll look at tonight. 15 years later, we still haven't corrected the information on our website, but by the end of the talk, we'll see that we're some way to correcting that and hopefully bringing this building back into some sort of public use again as well. There you have it. If you've been into South Wales on a train, you'll recognise it. You can't get in. We've been fenced in for about 15 years. Very distinctive looking building. 2 tall octagonal towers with very exaggerated pyramidal spur buttresses at the corners, converting a square base to octagons in this case. The other one on the right-hand side, you can all see my cursor. If some way somebody nodding to say that you see it on the screen would be handy as well. Otherwise, I'll be assuming I'm pointing to you and I'm not.
Yes, we can see your cursor.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And then in the centre, more spur buttresses, very slender ones on a colossal rectangular structure, or semi-polygonal turrets to the field. Massive rectangular piered base. I stood on top of the mud level on a plank a few years ago and pushed poles down about 3 meters into this. We still don't know where the bottom is, but it's a dock. It's effectively a wet dock for mooring boats. Very few parallels kicking around the country. It's probably from the castle's most famous from. You have an array of different windows from, mullioned Tudor windows. You've got bits of obvious medieval loops, completely restored, point-headed arches in the hall. 15th century windows hit by the ministry, various trefoils, amazing fine sort of late medieval ornament, banded masonry. And then I think most of you will be able to see this as sort of hardened castle anoraks. In fact, you can see the great contrast between what's clearly the early rougher eroded stone, very extensive and very necessary officers' works restoration. So it sits on the river. You can't get into it. Jeremy Knight wrote a seminal article about 20 years ago, so more than that, now almost 30, which I've discussed with him at length and the findings of this. And I have to sort of make a nod to Jeremy himself, who's been very gracious here for making the argument against sort of previous published work. Rick himself, of course, and late John Kenyon as well, all their drafts of will hopefully come out in the next 18 months or so as a sort of much longer hand article. There it is, rising directly from the tidal waters of the Usk. Phenomenal achievement of medieval engineering. I'd love to see the foundations. We'll probably never know. And to brief context and background. Beginning of Newport Castle is the Norman conquest of Wales, and you can see here at its lowest river crossing, mid-19th century stone bridge replacing a former timber structure. The medieval church, now Cathedral St Gwynflew, on the hill to the south, where the original settlement and castle stood. It's an appropriated Welsh native site of Clas, or Mother Church, then appropriated by the Normans, and very grand Norman nave survives from that period. And the first castle mound is just along the top of the hill there. And then the castle overlooking its river, here converted into a brewery by the sort of early 19th century. You can see these towered structures of tower post-brewing process. And boats, of course, sailing the arches of the river. I've left this in from previous talks. I won't insult you all by explaining how to look at historical source, but I mean, these are as prevalent as anywhere at Newport. I was teamed up with Rick. My job was to look at the building, and the late Christopher Philpotts That was the historian that I was working with. His brief was, right, look at anything before 1500. We know enough about the Dukes of Buckingham. Might just look at the fabric of the castle, and the two together we can come up with a narrative. Um, as we sort of already knew, as any baronial castle, you only get these circumstantial passing references, and the Welsh swept down into Gwynthlw, sacked the following castle. Early building account limited the notes of repairs when crown hands, but often non-specific. Structures we hear about don't necessarily survive. You've got a chapel in the 1180s. Again, most castle chapels get mentioned at various points in a legal dispute in this particular case, but where that stood, we do not know. And the records for the key family in the castle's history, as far as we're concerned, there was no the official Cadw line, largely destroyed during the Despencer Wars in the early 14th century. So we do not have the records for any building works at Newport. It's pretty much the same as Giant Caerphilly down the road. We don't know the masons, the architects employed on building project of that scale. Usual issues with antiquarian views. We only ever see the river elevation, not the stuff at the back that we don't know anything about. Plans aren't necessarily accurate. You'll see some later on that were supposedly done by professional surveyors of the day. Straight lines, I think, have been a professional standard forever, but certainly not for some of these people. And then you've got very detailed 15th century record building accounts for major renovation by Humphrey Stafford, Duke of Buckingham. Again, very difficult to relate to the specific structures, tower names changed and so on. And then to top it all off, very incomplete or extensive, but frustratingly incomplete records of substantial intervention by the Ministry of Works. No accounts of what must have been very extensive clearance excavations too, so we've got no idea what sits underneath the current structure. Just tantalising references to pieces of walling. And here as you have it, plan of the castle, grand riverfront, and then behind it a very, very plain loop of walling. This is kind of showing us the limitations of the antiquarian sources for us, really. We have the towers, we have the remains of the buildings behind, which has since been dug out. Critically, the location of the initial land gatehouse, long gone by the time this was drawn in the middle of the 19th century. So the Watergate was never the primary route into the site. Secondary land gate to the north, which was flattened as late as 1972. I'll talk about later on. We get these critical details at the back, sort of look like fireplaces and ranges of rooms around the back of this blank curtain wall. But the general message is there wasn't a lot beyond what you could already see in terms of masonry. And the area I've just shaded out was bulldozed in 1972, as late as 1972 for a road scheme, which still beggars belief, really. It's a very, very sort of late example of massive archaeological destruction without record. Cadw tradition, I've used Ridling Castle reconstruction to insult you all by demonstrating what a motte-and-bailey would have looked like. Conquest of the Norman conquest of Glamorgan and Morgannwg is the context of Newport Castle being built. Robert Fitzhammond striking along the coast around 1090. As the Norman invasion worked, comet by comet, cantref by cantref, taking the Welsh land units one by one and establishing castles at important places. Followers then fanning out along the valleys on the coastal plain. 1104, we have a grant, St. Gwynthlew's Church, the Class Church on the hill, with Basilic Priory nearby. So the Normans are in the area, they're appropriating land, they're appropriating religious institutions. And this is almost certainly the context for the first castle being built. A couple of very, very vague antiquarian maps showing the location of a large mound described by Cox in the early 19th century as being, far too big to be a barrow, sort of 30 foot high with a ditch, another big bank and ditch around that. Sounds like a motte-and-bailey, plonk on the hill next to the church, almost certainly was. This first appears a record of a castle near the Novel Burgo and a bridge in a grant by Earl Robert of Gloucester to Montacute Priory a few years later. And then from then on, it's a classic case of a castle flits in and out of history as it becomes involved in broiled national events, or the Lord dies and the crown step in. So throughout the 12th century, there's a series of references to the castle, the town, and the bridge. Always the new castle, the new town, the new bridge, implying straight away you have a unit on the riverside of a new structure away from the motte on the hill. We've got 1172, Henry II is quelling a Welsh rebellion at River Usk, which again, presumably is not on the hill anymore. And then the rest of the 12th century, you won't read through all of these, but a whole series of events where you have this sort of unit of castle planted town. You can see from this early plan, it's probably 17th century copied again, the hillside motte is just off the bottom left of my screen, or was buried by railway spoil in the mid-19th century, probably still there. Settlement running down from St Gwynthew's, and then the later walled town took up this area between the creek. The famous Newport ship was found. Got my cursor on the wall. Bridge crossing there, still in wood when this was drawn, and then the castle itself, quite a gap around it. So the intimation of another possible enclosure here. Here are royal repairs, you have sea defences, with the bridge being rebuilt. At one point, you have a Welsh lord installed, so Henry II installs Howell of Cleon, sort of rabble-raising local, sort of independent local in the sort of uplands of Machen, who kind of does a job a bit like Lord Rees did in West Wales by acting as King's regional justicer. So, you know, it's in Welsh hands for a while, as Cleon was for most of that period. So Caerleon Castle's about 3 miles off in the middle of the Roman fort, the top right of the screen. And we keep hearing, you know, repairs over a reasonably long period of time. Quick map. Apologise for the quality, but it makes a point. This is a hydrological map of South Wales. You can see various river channels. The actual coastline, I'll follow with my cursor. We have mud flats, tidal creeks as well. You can see a trend of castles by 1200. Chepstow, we've got Caldicot on the Ned Creek down here. All of the earliest, lowest river crossings of major rivers. Newport itself, Maes Glas on the Ebbw, Rumney, Castle of Newport, and on the Rumney Cadw on the Taf, and so on. And this is a trend followed throughout Wales. By 1200, it's almost certainly you have a castle there. You've got the documentary evidence of the unit of castle, bridge, and town, planned town, and then we have the sort of likelihood that this crossing will have been installed in some shape or form. What form the first Newport Castle took, we really don't know. There are a few hints from minor evidence. This is Plan T. Morris in Cox on about the dodgy surveying. How he's contrived a 25-degree angle from a single straight line, I do not know, probably from memory. You can see the castle at the turn of the 19th century. Blank curtain wall, again, hints of some of these fire backs. The one gateway still survived, and at the main gate, the long got a memory. This is probably drawn from memory as well. By this time, the Monmouthshire Bretton Canal crumbling armoured and driven through the back of the moat. It certainly didn't look like this in 1801. But what you have is a very, very broad ditch, described as wet and tidal by several antiquarians. Perhaps you've got a scenario like an Ogmore or Swansea or Cardiff, river crossing ringwork with a sort of periodically silted up water-filled ditch. And this is presumably the trace of a rather irregular back end of a later medieval castle. This is Ogmore. It's a stepping stone here, so ringwork and bailey, with a 12th century square keep and a slightly later faceted curtain wall around. You can imagine a similar setup at Newport. Other hints of an earlier building. O'Neill mentioned square foundation has been excavated during the clearance works in the 1930s by the ministry. We've no idea where that stood, but in and amongst some of the structures, we have blocks of this. This is Sutton limestone, Vale Glamorgan, opposite end of Vale, not far from Ogmore. You shouldn't be getting this in Monmouthshire at all, but there are blocks of it built into later openings at various points in Newport. They've been recycled from something and presumably on the site itself. And these have been confirmed by the National Museum geologist as well. They are what we assume they are. So that's your Norman dressing stone of choice, for Morgan at least. By 1200, then you've got a castle that's presumably got some sort of stone buildings. It's the head of its own march of lordship. Like all of the lordship centres in South Wales, they've all developed stone keeps of some sort by 1200. The proliferation of very minor castles to the west in settled lowland Glamorgan that have towers, must have got 15, 20 square keeps of various shapes and sizes. Nothing like the East Anglian examples that we see of the great English ones. These are relatively modest structures built in an area where you still have a constant threat of war and incursion from the disaffected and the disinherited Welsh of the uplands. So Newport sits on the Usk, staring across its lordship boundary into Laverned, which stays in the Welsh area until sort of the end of the 13th century. Edlergun, the Caerleon is its castle, just to the north. Again, that remains in Welsh hands. Newport Stowe, the early motte, may appear in some documents concurrently with the Newport Castle by the river. So again, different manor, potentially somebody else living up there. And it's got a Demesne Castle at Rumney, which developed stone defences by 1200, now obliterated by housing. A series of minor mottes and masonry castles, certainly by the end of the 13th century, at massively damaged Maes Glas and Rochester. It's centre of a march of lordship. And this is carved out of a former kingdom called Gwynthew, which stretches from the Usk coastal plain. So my cursor is following the high ground at the edge of the Gwent level, the Gwent wetlands, into rolling hills, again, reasonably useful land, into the uplands, pretty much as far up as Merthyr. In the other direction, you've got a native Welsh castle surviving at Machen, stayed in Welsh hands until the middle of the 13th century. And this arrangement was followed across South Wales, with the Normans taking the convenient and more fertile and accessible agricultural lands on the coastal strip, the Vales, effectively, like Vale of Glamorgan versus Blaen y Maganwg and Blaen y Gwent, that the uplands of those particular territories the Welsh were allowed to carry on in until the 13th century. The castle is there. It's pretty much all known until about 1200. And the key event really for this tale is Newport lordship falling into the hands of the Clares, the Earls of Gloucester, who are already very, very prominent family. They've held Strigil and Chepstow, major players in the invasion of Ireland. And Newport becomes one of a large number of lordships they acquire in Glamorgan. Gwynfryd effectively being part of a lesser sort of a subsidiary to Glamorgan at the time. It becomes a lordship in its own right called Newport by the early 13th century. There it is, and you can see the general outline here. So that's the original Welsh comment, and they've got the various settled areas that become Norman on marcher lordships elsewhere. It becomes one of a series of important castles at the centre of its own territory. This one unusual, it stares out across the river boundary to the former Welsh capital, former lordship. 1217, the lordship passed to the Clare family. We hear of it intermittently then for the next few years. Certainly no details of building. Certainly during the baronial wars with sort of help from Llewellyn of Iorwerth and Gwynedd. And there's a relief force, a substantial relief force, crossbowmen, horse sent to Newport to relieve what seems to be a siege or blockade. Richard Marshall, again, Harry in Monmouth the same year, taken from the crown by Richard Marshall. So again, the same cast of characters. It's in national events though, rather than just a small regional affair. And in 1262, Gilbert II and Gilbert the Red declare inherits the lordship of his father Richard. Gilbert's our key player. I refer to him as the second here, and it's the second of the Earl of Gloucester, rather than the second Gilbert declared. There were many before that. So key man, 1262, Gilbert declared Council Lord Richard. Starts building castles everywhere, effectively, whether they've done his ancestral land in Kent and Suffolk, or mainly in South Wales. Begins Caerphilly in 1268, after annexing most of the uplands of Saint Gennig, which is the next Welsh territory to the west of Newport. 1270, annexed Gwynfryd as well, the upland territory here, taking a castle of Machen, so it had been stolen by the marshals through some sort of legal subterfuge. So that's another building to add to his portfolio. Dies in 1295, succeeded by his widow, Joan Acre, who's the Edward I's third daughter. Joan died, then succeeded by Gilbert III. She holds the lordship for the younger Gilbert III, in 1306. He dies himself at Bannockburn, 1314, and the castle reverted to crown custody. So a brief sort of potted history of what the Clares are up to, and then the general family timeline. During this period, they've established, owned, or taken possession of, added to probably a couple of dozen castles across South Wales. We'll fly through some later on to Cadw, as you mean, in Glamorgan. Castles like Kenfig in the west of their area, Neath, Caerphilly, of course. But Gilbert feels not quite as big, but equally impressive and imaginative structures like Llangibby, Tredeeg, one of the biggest single enclosure castles in the British Isles. More Iceland with Merthyr Tydfil, through the biggest round towers ever built. They build everywhere because they can, effectively. So you have this whole portfolio of Clare-built castles, which luckily for us mostly survive with enough architectural detail for it to build up the sequence of developments. Not just the national castle study typologies. You can actually look at what the Clares are doing. You can look at changes to their sort of estate over time. Right, summarise, got a motte-and-bailey, probably on Stow Hill by 1100. The Normans are in the area by then, they're appropriate in mother churches. Moved to the river by the mid-12th century, possibly the two coexist temporarily. Likely replacement in stone by the beginning of the 13th century, 30 by 1260, from Richard de Clare. Dies, prolific stone castle builders. They're probably out happy with a Norman keep over by the river by the middle of the 13th century, and certainly the Normans wouldn't have had an earthen ringwork as a kaput of a quite important and accessible match of lordship. But issue we have no records of Clare building works at all at Newport between 1217 and 1234. Setting Newport apart from most of the rest of the Clare estate, we have reference to them. But then you have a similar problem with Caerphilly, where it really doesn't appear in the annals that much. All the muniments, all of the building accounts destroyed in the same sort of dispenser wars in the early 14th century. And again, repairs mentioned in dispenser in the early 14th century, but of uncertain nature. No documentary evidence, however, at all, anything being built by the Earls of Stafford after 1326. They document this building, various structures in the town, almshouses, having the churches, the building in Newport, but not the castle. And this is the principal finding of Christopher's work on the documents, really. Plenty of circumstantial evidence declares they're in Newport, they've got a castle, but it's not destroyed because we've got records of all that to be destroyed. So that's a potted history, the first piece of the history of the castle. Don't want to dwell on too much, got a lot to get through. And then onto the building survey that went with it. So this for me was arriving as an archaeologist as far as I was concerned. Rick rang me up, who's this towering, quite scary figure in Welsh archaeology, which people just assume he's right all the time, and he wasn't. And Will, I've got something to do. Newport Castle, it's a project. And as far as I was concerned, as a Newporter, this was it. I don't need to achieve anything else in my career after this. Brilliant, great, I'll do it. What do you want me to do? I'll take a huge set of drawings and spend about 2 weeks in Newport Castle, which became about 3 months in the end, climbing up things, crawling over it, and just the classic old-fashioned pencil building survey, which was great. And so I thought about the logistics of working in there, being closed in by an underpass with all sorts of drug paraphernalia and ne'er-do-wells hanging about. So it's quite a nerve-wracking process, the fieldwork, really. Sort of let yourself in the morning and have a look around, make sure I was alone, lock up, and then a kid would turn up on my shoulder about 30 seconds later. And this is sort of daily routine. Unrecognizable dead animals on the floor. So you drop in a pencil, just kicking it away because I chewed it by accident. It took quite a long time. Had to leave site a few times just to be able to assure that I was safe while 12 kids suddenly turned up inside the buildings. This was done with quite a bit of duress. But otherwise, like a classic piece of standing building masonry recording, working from a few sets of engineering drawings, annotating the mistakes, filling in the gaps, having to draw in many courses of missing stonework, and then marking up by phase the earliest work, it's pink primary build here, various later medieval, and then the green is basically modern. Refaced anyway for the early 20th century. Did this the whole structure. Involved ladders, near-death experiences, almost falling off a ladder inside this tower, but we got over the lot of it after a while. So the physical evidence was slightly problematic, even by the standards of these buildings. I looked at quite a few of these for Cadw as part of my job. Is that most of the early work, or the key junctions, more to the point, are either hidden, destroyed by later medieval works like the Buckingham renovations, and you've got lots of damage by post-medieval industrial work as well. So again, those features where you need to see where something joins to something else, they're never really visible. More confusion created by 1930s Office of Works Restoration. So the ministry and Cadw's sort of a great grandparent organisation, I suppose. Very necessary in that the structure was about to collapse, but they probably went further than we've gone, apart from maybe the Butte at Caerphilly, this 20th century restoration on parts of the building. Very, very extensive amounts of refacing, rebuilding, and not always properly documented. And then, as we've mentioned earlier, the back end of the site and other diagnostic structures flattened by the council in 1972. I think Jeremy Knight was allowed about a day on site with one of our masons to record it, and then completely locked out of it. So we've lost a lot of the key features. We've lost the landward gatehouses, and the relationships between some of the key structures are obscured. You can't quite work out how you got around in there or what the stratigraphy is within the building. And very, very limited archaeological potential in the surviving area of the castle. It's been dug out, filled in again. I wouldn't really know where to go to dig to find more information. So we're left with circumstantial historical evidence for the early period and pretty compelling architectural evidence anyway. And the conclusions were 2 initial phases of building, which established the plan of the castle. So polygonal corner towers with spur buttresses, Watergate with the same, with a substantial structure, probably a 3-story structure above it. Hall at one end. I suspect the early kitchen in this tower early on. We know of another oven at the opposite side from antiquarian sources, but otherwise gone. And then seeming the taller of the 2 towers, the principal chambers. It's certainly the comfy room, better fireplaces, linked to the central tower somehow by a wall gallery, and then all the rest completely gone. We've got a few photographs of this section of curtain wall and this gatehouse for the road came through. So that's the general layout of the site. It mostly seems to be established in one big phase of building, and a second, which is almost a continuation of the first one, using different materials and different architectural motifs and emblems, which we'll look at the motivations for later on. Certainly, the layout is of the early phase castle, which certainly isn't the later 14th century. But to start, our first phase, I'll come through some of the rationale later on. We'll attribute it to the Clares. All of the architectural detail of the earlier phases of the castle, Buckingham added to a structure that was much older than was previously thought, effectively. So you have the shell of a late 13th century building. Plenty of giveaway features. So, primary build, see my cursor, purple or red sandstone, just up the hill, see a bit of the curtain wall here. It's about first floor level. Got a yellowish, orangish stud-book classic sandstone or conglomerate in the quoins of these very, very distinctive high spur buttresses, which rise most of the height of the towers. You think something like a contemporary like Goodrich, the road, for example. Exaggerated service turrets, which we'll see in a minute. I think John Goodwin calls them ear turrets, tacked on the back of late 13th century towers, but really exaggerated, rising up above the rest of the building. There to look good as well as service stairs and toilets. Generous latrine provision. So, you pick your Edwardian castle, and you can go to everywhere, and Newport's no exception. Very, very, it's pretty much ensuite on every floor, with sort of intermediate sort of rooms being given their own rooms as well. And some of the details as well, which we'll look at in a second. Cross-looped toilets, very short arms, so rather than sort of expanded out big crosses, you have these very sort of short, stubby cross arms, and sort of another type of sort of plain square-headed loops you can see here. All the quoins at start seem to be quarter rounded with no stops. Again, see them at Caerphilly, the Clare Castle, very, very common in the earlier Clare works. And major archways, doorways, segmented gatehouse arch with double chamfer. And we'll see a few pictures of these in a minute. A half-rounded portcullis slot, very wide one in the watergate. And then finally, use of mural passages with the bypass sort of service room to get between the main chambers and the principal state rooms. You can see this break in the masonry up above, and we'll look at the top of this tower later on, but everything effectively changes above first floor level. The other thing to be aware of, look at the bottom, we've got this banded masonry, the blue lias limestone's been used to pick out a pattern, which you can see running right away across this face of the curtain wall. And again, we'll look at pattern masonry, polychromatic masonry a bit later on, and simple pointed door arches elsewhere internally. They're the main features. So here we go, doorway to the tower we've just seen, very eroded, but the profile's fine in a few of these. It's a quarter round. Cut and paste these out from sort of most of the sort of first phase of works at Caerphilly. No sign of stops. You've got that sort of colour scheme of the purple, the orange, and the blue lias up above. Slightly more problematic windows in the hall next door, which has been restored at a head that might be incorrect altogether by the ministry. The evidence is very, very, very slight by the time they got rid of the brewery building traces that punched their way through all these structures and windows, but you've still got the same around the internal jams there. And we've got various cross arrow loops. You can see not quite an eyelet there, it's a sort of like stump on a latrine turret right by the breach of the main road, and it smashes through. Now, others are quite inaccessible up against the railway bridge, which is about 6 inches from the face of the tower. Fantastic correspondence with the early 20th century. The railway bridge designers were probably more sympathetic than certainly the council were by saying, well, we could knock your tower down, but we'll just give it a 6-inch berth. These are cross eyelets. You've got 2 there. They feel quite large. I put my hand in there with a rubber glove. There were pigeons, dead ones, stacked up between them and the wall on either side. We felt them. Our head mason verified that it wasn't just me wanting to see the things. And we found another one a bit further around the corner. So these existed, and these exist across the Clare estate. It's a characteristic sort of type of arrow loop you see on a lot of their buildings. And you get these second type of window, which again, they're more like not exactly arrow loops. They're quite wouldn't call it a lancet either, sort of long loop-like structures, very, very eroded, a piece of Suttonstone built in there. You see something similar at Goodrich, but with shutter rebates on the outside. So again, 1280s, 1290s of that period anyway. So there are plenty of other examples. Even Newport Castle has a number, another Clare Castle from the end of the 13th century. And we see another type, which is almost between a loop and one of these on one of the latrines. So you've got early purple masonry here, and that loop being punched through by a rather crude 15th century window. You've got the top, the bottom, and this in the middle. A few examples of this dotted around the site too. I mentioned mural passages. If you think of imagine this is the principal accommodation in the South Tower overlooking the town bridge. Large blank elevation, scale of the brewery building here. Fugitive door opening that was blocked up, but with no record being made, you know exactly what was in there in the first place. I suspect it was a brewery structure, but we'll probably never know. But linking this main accommodation at first floor level with the central tower, the main tower, you have a gallery, formerly with arrow loops facing over the Usk there. There's shown as crosses by the Bucks as well, but they'd all been punched through the various industrial uses in the 19th century later on. So again, somewhere like Caerphilly, where you can move from the kitchen block and around the back of the hall into the solar or initial solar block, the principal accommodation, quite common, not just in Clare castles, but it's something that Clare's been quite a lot of. And evidence both the height of this and on the main tower that there's possibly another deck of curtain wall above it. See the vault, which has been thick enough to carry something, probably with a palados and a parapet up above that. So high, exaggerated curtain wall there. And there it is from the outside. So the overall effect, if you wince and strip away 15th century windows here and here and here, and think more of the cross loops, lancets, not surviving here, but it's more of the sort of general appearance that you get. Then you get sort of this striking contrast between the red sandstone and the red sandstone and the sort of the blue lias like masonry here. You can see the extent of later refacing. A lot of this much sharper stone is the Ministry of Works having to intervene before the whole thing sloughed off into the river. Watergate itself bears specific mention. Pretty certain it belongs to the first phase, A, because it's bonded to the curtain walls to either side. So you can see this lovely purple sandstone. The bands run around. Double chamfered door arch. You look at something like a Caerphilly. This is straight out of the Clare copybook of what you put on a gatehouse. Double chamfered. Dock underneath. Your plan here, which is basically sort of a straight rectangular chamber. And then the second floor corbelled out above the rest. All of these have been renewed, but we've got the records of them being renewed because they were failing. Then you have these two turrets with very slender spurs at the lower level, and two turrets projected out with the late 13th century before light in this one and a Tudor mullion there. And the rest massively refitted by Buckingham in the 15th century and then the ministry above. It's missing another story again from its final phase. So an unusual building. We have others we'll come on to a little bit later on, but really only a couple that stand at any height that have enabled a complete boat to go in in Britain. View inside, quarter rounded. It's really, really wide arch. It must be one of the wider sort of portcullises we've got in Wales, and certainly more so than some of the conventional land gatehouses at the other Edwardian castles. But you have the half round portcullis groove. Again, read Neil Guy's piece in the CSG Journal a few years ago. You know, these pop up in the King's works in the middle of the 13th century, and it's sort of spread out into the baronial castles later on. The point being that they're expensive. You pick it up again, sandstone. You have to float down the coast and quite a few miles away, and rather than just put a rectangular groove, you've got this change that's almost unnecessarily rounded. They're there, they're flashy, and they're a thing of their age, really. You see the sandstone being picked out here against the sort of the yellow sandstone against the red. You've got the bands inside the building. And behind the remains of what we're assuming is some sort of slot for a counterweight. There are two slots in the ceiling above this, or maybe a sluice, but we've never been below the level of the mud here. The ministry did, but Straighton didn't record anything. I got into trouble at work for standing on a plank in this. I had people with me, and it was all right. And just pushing a series of irons down and down. So we went about 3.5 meters below this level and didn't hit anything. It's a very, very deep dock. And to go back, probably beyond the level of foundation that we see now. So absolutely fascinating to speculate how did they found the castle in this position. put it to the engineers that we're working with at the moment, how would this work? And they said, well, you either just keep on throwing stone in, or they somehow found some way of coffering off an area. Potentially, you might have some construction evidence out there from how this was put in the first place, but standard engineering, whichever way you look at it. Um, Upstairs, so at the top is largely 15th century work for Buckingham here and here, big windows punched in. But there is evidence that this was a three-story tower initially. So if you look at the photo on the bottom right, you can see a probably incorrectly restored Carnarvon arch, formerly leading onto the wall walk, the tower by the railway bridge. That's been blocked up because the vault of 15th century roof comes across it. You can just about see the traces. A terrible photograph. You can never get the light right in this building, but this is a bit better. You can just see this sort of plug here, sort of late the masonry plug in the final earlier ashlar, and there's a little light there, presumably the light the vault, show the vault off, I'm guessing. So this no longer becomes the access out onto the wall walk. So you've got a structure that's effectively 3 floors high. It's been knocked into 2 by the end of the 15th century. So a very large set of rooms above a gate. We'll look at some of them later on. There's a second phase of construction, which we're attributing to Jonah Acre or Gilbert de Clare, Gilbert III. And Joan spends time in the South Wales estates, specifically Caerphilly. May finish off her husband's work, could be Gilbert the Younger, the prolific castle builder while he has the time before he died. You see the first phase, lancets, loops, whatever we want to call them, lots of ministry replacement, but above the early masonry, as in the tower adjacent, becomes darker again. So there's a slightly darker old red sandstone. I think there's about sort of 400 or 500 meters between some quite distinct quarries on the hill above. You have a corbel table, quarter rounded, 2 originals, the rest replacements for originals that shattered. Blue lias relieving arches over the windows. We've seen one on the tower next to this. Slightly lighter mouldings on the coins. We'll put them in a minute. Defoil lancets turn up, quarter round corbel table, and all the door jambs change from quarter rounded bullnose to chamfered jambs with sort of high classic fair pyramidal stops. And then we've got the Carnarvon arch on the wall walk of the central tower. So here we are, just looking back at the northern tower, you can see this quite fine, crisp little trefoil light. These appear all over the Clare estate by their final phase of building. Probably the best examples is something like Llanbleddau in the Vale of Glamorgan. Document has begun newish in 1307 by Gilbert III. So we will be there by 1314. And they appear in Clare castles and also tenants' castles throughout the area, and they're very much a thing of their time, but they don't appear in the first phase of Newport at all. See this decorative lias relief picked out above it, and then you see that the coins change with the change in sandstone. They become slightly lighter. These are blue lias one, lighter Sudbuck sandstone with the orange stuff we've got there below here. So effectively, it's been continued upwards after a bit of a break. Some details. Pyramidal stops, cut and paste them in Philly, Castle Coch, Neath, wherever you want to see them. They exist all over the Clare estate in South Wales. Another one here, they sort of vary in depth. They're quite subtle, but happy with them as sort of parallels to contemporary buildings elsewhere. Over the northern tower, it seems to be taller, the story higher than the southern tower. This is the bridge, the story higher than the northern one we've been looking at so far. So 2 decks of very decently appointed accommodation. A latrine opening up into the river, the only one that goes in directly. I think they use it a bit more. You can see the same here. So you've got the spurs are good, and then everything changes up above a certain level. Everything's purple and everything's sort of brownish. And then you get these quite polite lancets. This is a bit of an anomaly, but again, they've got a different head. The interior looks completely different to this one. We're assuming this is an early one, and that's the latest. They put the top story on the second phase. The coin change slightly above that, as the drawing shows. And so, under my cursor at the right, you have the sort of face of one of the turrets, exaggerated service turrets with stairs and latrines into the castle ditch. I've left this in just to show you something you can't see anymore. There was a secondary gatehouse, two gates, main one at the town to the south. This existed until the 70s, so it's effectively a hole in the wall with a drawbar slot. And you're looking down the passage a few weeks before it was demolished. We have evidence again that at least the top deck of this bridge, that this gatehouse seems to have followed the same construction sequence as everything else. purple phase of the tower next to it, dark stuff up above. You have a doorway, quarter round on the first floor, so quarter round in purple at the bottom. Top floor, everything goes brown. And then we've got these lighter sandstone doors with chamfers, pyramidal stops, and that's leading across the top of the hall, maybe by some sort of wooden gallery onto what was the top level of the gatehouse, which was out here, and the surviving piece of curtain wall. So, in short, the architectural details of the first two phases of the earliest masonry are consistent with the late 13th and early 14th century. Numerous features in common with successive buildings of the Clare family. Typologically, probably by Gilbert the Red before 1295. His father's castles, Richard's, tend to be simpler affairs. They've got round towers, Castle Cork's first phase, for example, Trissant. Round tower castle, nothing quite as ambitious. Certainly move to polygons later on, although Gilbert himself builds round at Morlice. Then completed the same scheme but amended details and materials either by Widow, Stone, or Gilbert III before 1340. No architectural evidence for dispenser works or building. You hear of dispenser repairs in the 14th century. They called the lordship, but they spent most of their period in charge on a war footing. They invested at Caerphilly, but again, we can't see anything that really doesn't marry to other Clare castles. And again, as far as I can see it, and this has been peer tested quite extensively, there isn't anything there that you could put in the middle of the 14th century by the Earls of Stafford who certainly have documented building anything. And then this question of not completed the original plan, or was it actually? Big question we'll come on to in a minute. So there you have it. Looking for parallels. Now, in the past, some of the rationale for this being pushed as a later castle was that you've got these flamboyant late windows, which, these are all documented. We have building records for Buckingham, the 15th century, refacing, planting windows in. The architectural evidence bears it out. And the real question of this is of how old is the castle that Buckingham added to? And the assumption had previously been made and just repeated again and again and again. It must have been the Staffords have an event in the 1320s when they inherit the lordship. Other than that, we've got pretty much nothing. Always look closest to home when you're trying to look for your parallels and date these things. So, Caerphilly, North Dam, by Gilbert, certainly by. I don't really want to get embroiled in exactly when did this phase of Caerphilly go up. It could be by 1288. You can look at one edition of our guidebook. Certainly by Gilbert's death in 1295, which was probably well underway. It's probably the third major phase of building. So the great inner ward of the Concentric castle has been built, round towers in the corners. And then Clare Estate moves on to polygons. So you've got this grand twin tower gatehouse by 1295 by Gilbert. So we've got a lot of familiar features here. Third semi-octagonal towers, heavily restored, but some of these have original elements, very short-armed cross arrow loops. That's a few left at Newport. And of course, the spurs, cross oilets now responds. Quarter-rounded mouldings, certainly in the round towers and the inner ward. There's a few in the bottom of this as well. Again, segmental headed arch over the gateway, double chamfered, another one at the inner end. Narrower, but very, very similar to Newport Watergate. Got a corbelled parapet, a bit of it there on the left, south dam. You'll see it again in a minute on the north. It's just corbelled out on a plain string course. And Newport a little bit more advanced than that. And then this adjacent curtain wall, it's sort of almost like Byzantine towers, just sort of stretching out into the distance. The spur buttress, just like the Newport ones. Haven't got the rectangular turrets that Newport has as services, but they're very, very different structures. The Newport towers are comfortable domestic buildings. These are basically guard rooms with nothing up above, so you're missing a story for Newport in the first place. Again, you could argue that these were probably never intended to be used. They're entered by ladder rather than stairs from the wall walk level. My cursor, you see this quite plain spring porcelain on the top of them. And again, they've been added to the curtain wall. You can see the straight joint there. It's starting to sink away a little bit. But they're certainly there by Gilbert's death is the sort of general consensus. Or I dare say we could have an argument about this later on in the questions coming through. Cross loops again, exactly the same type. And then most of the mouldings in these are just plain chamfers. There's the twin towered gatehouse with two more at the other end, which again is only accessible from above. No ground floor entrances into the towers to either side, and that's got chamfered mouldings in that. So they're there. Again, a good indicator why people use these have these spur buttresses. I'll just go back a bit. Look where these castles are sitting. This is in a river, so you're giving yourself a broader base as you possibly can. That's actually square. And it's just a device effectively for converting your substantial square base into a more elegant or more fashionable shape up above. So balance or Goodrich, for example, square bases on a difficult rocky site converted to cylinders, and Newport, in this case, Caerphilly, very, very marshy ground, the big wet moat. You can see they start to split away a bit already. You're giving yourself that base. They look good, but they also serve a sort of more utilitarian function as well. Again, look at the profile of these for later on. Straight main face, sort of straight cylinder, if you like, of the tower. And you've got batter turned into a straight plinth. Very, very, very similar to the Newport ones, which I'll come on to in a minute. I've cut out a lot of slides about spur buttresses. I've had conversations with the likes of Neil Guy about this at length, Ludlow. Where do they come from? Who builds them first? Where did the idea appear? And Neil's actually very kindly sort of passed on examples in southern Italy from sort of middle of the 13th century or slightly earlier, but they just appear in the South Wales borders in very large numbers. As part of the work on Newport, I think sort of 7 or 8 years ago, ended up just trawling everything, grabbing all the overseas castle books that we find, and just creating a spreadsheet of every spur tower in Europe that was in the literature in some shape or form. To identify maybe about 80 or so of these, of which probably 55 of them in the southern Welsh marches, in concentration in the southeast and in the southwest. There's some distinctions to be made that give you a bit of a clue. So these are possibly the earliest. Now, Neil Ludlow sits on the fence in his Carmarthen Castle book as to whether they may be slightly later, but you've got very, very plain details. It's not the most comfortable tower. Undressed details at windows, and just a single straight batter coming off the cylinder, southwest tower, Carmarthen here. And that's the southwestern type of spur tower. Similar things at Cardigan, might possibly be a bit later. Goodrich Castle in Herefordshire, single straight length. And you see even later ones like Cadw, beautiful polygonal chapel towers at the turn of the 14th century. Very, very simple, long, plunging straight spurs heading on the edge of a very difficult slope. So the very distinctive Western type of these things. In the east, you get more like Newport, and this demonstrates the profile a bit more. Straight up, they batter back and then merge in. So you've got this is an architectural drawing, of course. We've missed this facet, but the mouldings are quite incredible. You have every single one, about 1, 2, 3, 4, 15, 20, 30 courses. Every single one is a different graduating shape, blend the horizontal, the parallel, the horizontal, vertical, and the battered bases. It's really, really impressive piece of workmanship. These are a distinctive southeastern group clustered on the Clare estate. Interestingly, you see very few of these. You've got Newport, you've got Llandaff Bishop's Palace, Caerphilly. Go through a list of them, and then this type doesn't appear in the West, with one exception, which is Carrick-Kennan. The series of these, a gatehouse, not dissimilar to the Caerphilly Inner Gate, the Caerphilly North Dam Gate we just saw, and you have the same motif here. Far less nicely dressed, but you see the cross arrow loop there with the short arms, short facets at Carrick-Kennan, firmly in West Wales, probably built by John Gifford, Grimsfield in Gloucestershire. Of course, is one of Gilbert's tenants in chief as Earl of Gloucester. So again, you've got this idea that you've got maybe it's ideas, maybe it's the patron, is it the craftsman or the design? You certainly have. Bringing my work phone at 7:30 at night. I'm not answering that. Sorry. Good, gone. Apologies. So you have this stray example there, but with a connection to a different school of architecture much further east. It's back to this idea, the march has been a sort of boiling pot of ideas, patrons, craftsmen, and possibly designs, maybe on the King's works, and Carrick-Kennan certainly an outlier in an area of much, much simpler constructions. Onto the gatehouse, which is pretty much a one-off. Can't think, very few of these have survived, and we've got the base of one at Holt Castle, Edwardian Castle of John de Warren on the River Dee from the Edwardian conquest, which just survives a couple of parallel grooves in the banks of the River Dee, but we know it from drawings. The Newport one is a rectangular hole with a dock underneath. Quite disappointing number of shopping trolleys for central Newport. There's usually far more than that poking out of the river. And you can see the details here of the archway, and the panel above we've lost. It's been completely taken out by a very, very large ecclesiastically sized window in the 15th century. Bit of original there, and then got this hood molded 15th century window in here. We've got a couple of reasonably good parallels in the area. Apologies for the quality of the photograph. I had to steal one from an old Cadw file here. This is Uni Priory, so it's quite, Augustinians in the Vale of Glamorgan. Quite an insignificant establishment, really, but incredibly well preserved, probably through its obscurity, with this set of totally disproportionately impressive castle walls, acoustic walls. And that the northern gate, the more impressive of the two, dated around 1300. On the details, so again, the trefoil lights, very, very very sharp, what all the Southeast Walian ones seem to be. A double chamfer archway, the quarter round portcullis groove. But critically, you've got a square base, very slender spurs, converted into two turrets up above. So you can maybe imagine Newport with a bigger blank wall face. It's a much smaller tower. You're talking probably that much of the Newport one. It's only 2 stories, but again, it shares lots of details, things like quarter round path rounded fire backs and so on. So, is this the same hand? Another corbelled parapet, quarter rounded, supporting the walls above. No familiar prints at Newport had another floor. You can imagine this having some sort of matriculation or corbelling at roof level too. One example, not documented as a Clare build, but the similarities are such that you have to assume that there's Lords of Glamorgan, there's Gloucester. They're either patronising it, not documented, or they have some hand. It's the Mason people sort of copying the sort of the leading characters of the region. Final Clare Castle Llanblevion, which is almost an expanded version of the Newport Gate. It's almost impossible to photograph on this because you can't take them a step backwards. But you've got the twin towered gate now with a really huge panel with blank walling above the arch. It's slightly more elaborate than Newport. It's more of a showpiece. And if you look at the similarities between Newport and this one, showfront was built including sort of enclosing an early Norman keep, and the back was never finished anywhere near sort of a intended scale, presumably. Grand, heavily fortified facade, and then this thing. Again, very short cross loops, castles riddled with these, fought around with parapets, and similarities with a couple of the Newport latrines opening through the thickness of walls in this particular case. But again, it's almost an expanded version of the single rectangular tower at Newport, so it's got second portcullis, of course. And trefoil lights for the courtyard as well. This is contemporary with that upper phase of Newport. Another one, Llandaff Bishop's Palace, which is a small castle. Again, double chamfered gate arch, much, much smaller. And you've got this, being observed in a cable trench, straight down and back up, spurs back to him, back up, slightly less impressive. And to the rear, it's another ear turret or exaggerated turret, which is almost cut and paste the north turret of Newport Castle. So there are, again, similarities between, the structures, but not necessarily the same patron. Certainly these ideas are filtering around in the area. To the Watergate and its affinities, we all know that highways were the rivers are the highways of the day, really. Quickest, safest, fastest, most efficient way to get around the country. Clare's built other castles with Watergates. They occupied Gloucester. Gilbert always coveted Bristol, which you could float a boat into. Sort of very complicated set of river defences there, which have largely been lost. But up the road, about 3 miles up, next to the old Roman force, the Caerleon, the edge of the legionary fort here. And you've got the amphitheatre, and great conquest motte established on top of the fortress baths, biggest in Wales, maybe that or Cardiff. Probably the bailey of the castle running around where my cursor is. Main road coming straight through from the original Roman crossing. And then just off the one side, outside the castle walls itself, this fortified turreted wharf, now behind later retaining walls. So this idea again, landing, castles with landing stages. So this is a less elaborate version, but the principle is exactly the same. Gentry, to give you another random example on the Mono, so a river that you wouldn't assume would be particularly navigable, it's not a huge river. Again, flat bottom boats can evidently get there. Wide, wet moats, a million miles away from what we've seen at Newport. They're largely filled in. And this is the old mill racing in flood here. And you can see small postern, the drawbar behind it, allowing access onto what would have been the riverbed. And these towers probably rising straight to the river. Then lo and behold, about 30 years ago, I think we funded these excavations to excavate wharf walls. If you follow my cursor, somewhere up here on the river bank. So again, the ability to be able to land at relatively modest rivers and flat bottom boats. Of course, rivers as sort of sources of all manner of things as well. You can empty your latrines into them to Chepstow, terrifying looking, formerly wooden latrine hanging over the Wye. Goods in, winched up into cellars and the Roger Bigger III's Great Hall complex, again, Edwardian castles with spectacular riverine features. Buried freshwater cistern in the mud on the edge of the river, looks the winch up there. Vic Turner explored by boat quite dramatically, and more latrines emptied in. Rivers were useful things. The most extreme example being, Edward the First making the river come to him at Rydlan by bringing in Flemish and sort of Yorkshire ditch diggers to canalise a kilometre or so of the river clearly to meet the docks and various entrances from the river at Rydlan Castle. And Gilbert, of course, does these himself. He's built other things that could be considered the Watergate. Caerphilly, sitting in the middle of its grand moat, got this structure. So got the main gatehouse facing Newport direction here, corner towers, the inner walls, and these are the concentric outer defences. And you have a postern gate opening into them onto the Great Lake, which is later sort of joined to the inner curtain wall by this tower-like wing, probably more of a grain store and a sous kitchen for the kitchen range next door. But you've got this long passage, again, got portcullis at the bottom end. The doorway is largely gone. You've got a restored double chamfered arch taking you from the lake into the castle. Now, it's not a Watergate in the same sense as Newport. You wouldn't be floating into this on a boat, but the principle is possibly quite similar. You have to deliver food, grain to the kitchen and at the brewery. There's a doorway here at this level. You'll probably land, winch things in. The alternative would have been to have landed come across land outside the castle, one twin tower gatehouse, a couple of sets of doors, drawbridge, portcullis, to a second one in this wall, and then into the great inner gatehouse, and pretty much a similar arrangement to the other side. This is a quicker way in to just float across a lake from the other side of the other side that was now a park. And of course, it could possibly be leisure features as well as dramatic statements of that sort of chivalric ideal that some Kenilworth in the siege, and you're trying to recreate that image of a sort of Arthurian castle and so on. But certainly there's a certainly practical reason for having this entrance here, and it's almost like a small version of what you see at Newport. And the most famous tower, of course, St Thomas's Tower, Tower of London, masterfully explored by Jeremy Ashby, where you look at the idea of, again, another contemporary sort of 1270s onwards gate in the river, colours defending that. And then above it, in amongst all the restorations, Victorianisms, we've got a grand suite of rooms running above this with access from river level, and this idea that these guest chambers for the king himself, but some of these are access through the Wakefield Tower on sort of the landing bit of the castle too. So you've got this sort of a grand residential chamber. And as you've seen at Newport, there's certainly still a predilection for having lofty domestic towers in a kind of slightly earlier tradition. This is a different anomalous building. This is Clun in Shropshire. It's a Fitzallen structure built on the side of a motte, presumably to give it a bit more stability and to make space on the motte top. But you have effectively what's a fake Norman keep. It's got little sort of rounded blind windows here, but a couple of decks of halls above a basement. So if you transpose this idea to Newport, where you land from a river or come into the base of the tower on a river, and then you've got these 2 stories of high status accommodation up above it. And again, with possibly services contained in buttresses on the outside. So we thought about quite a bit when we're looking at the castle was the practicality of using this as an entrance. You see now when we walled this up ourselves to avoid flooding most of the road system of the town. It does come right up and over every now and again. Something somewhat at the mercy of the tide. If Gilbert decides to travel up from Gloucester, for example, he's on the Severn. You've got to have a boat that can go against the tide, or you wait for the tide to take you in the right direction, then turn the corner and up around into the River Usk, which again has got to be doing the right thing. You don't want to be coming up the river while the tide's going out there. Got a tidal chart here showing it's meaningless. It's almost just a putt piece to fill a corner of a picture. It's got the second highest Usk and Severn, the second highest tidal range of any river in the world. It explains how a tower like this might work. It would be marooned in certain circumstances, unless it's much, much deeper. It could float in potentially and maybe wait for the next tide to come out. certainly after lengthy discussions with the Coast Guard, who were quite disappointed I didn't want to land in that in a rowing boat with them, you wouldn't be able to use this all the time. It's not the most practical thing. So you've got high tides here that goes slightly higher, fine. But when it's down here, you're not using that. Clearly, never the primary entrance to the building. What you've possibly got is a ceremonial type structure where it may be that the Earl's barge arrives, all its finery, it's a heraldry blazing in the sun. You wave at your population in the town as you pass them by. You can get anywhere near them, touch them or smell them, and then perhaps appear at an upper window somewhere, give everybody a wave. It's certainly an exclusive and private way to get into the castle with, we're assuming, the 2 decks of accommodation up above it. And finally, polychromatic masonry makes this stand out. Newport's in a select group, heavily mutilated, but there's enough original to be able to piece the scheme out. Very frustrating that the drawings don't appear from the 1930s of this particular curtain wall, but the masons obviously followed something they could see. Certainly the banding's there. It's a very specific colour scheme, purple, orange, yellow, and green, blue. Not everybody's choice, but it's flashy, obviously cost a lot, and they're all imported from something quite local. And the orange sandstone deliberately comes from Sudbrook, which is a major quarry for Cowent, Chepstow Castle, and so on. Lots of Cadw Castle. Very hard orange sandstone along the 7 levels. We've got this. And Newport is one of an exclusive group. Most of these are the late 13th century. So we've got some earlier examples. For example, Beeston Castle, round for Chester. You've got stripes there. And then got Quasi Royal Castle. It's Rock in Cheshire. There's a whole series of these appear in the late 13th century, all of which are royal or so-called by close association. So Carnarvon, famously, Walls of Constantinople, supposedly. Beaumaris with checkerwork and various stripes. Ridlan, 3-tone scheme, yellow, got the white sandstone, the creamy sandstone above and red below. And then Denbigh, which I could show you lots of sketches, probably my favourite castle after Newport. Every single colour's got a different colour scheme. So you've got 4 or 5 different freestones, all of which have been dug out from miles away. You've got white with red stripes, red with white stripes, you've got honey coloured. The only northern spurs in Wales, by the way, here. Fox loops. You've got checker patterns, you've got statues, helicoidal patterns, some are green. It's incredible. Every single one's slightly different. They really make the point. And these work as sort of spectacles, not just as fortresses, but the local population, they're absolutely awe-inspiring. This is the biggest structure in North East Wales. But to your peers, your contemporaries, they'll understand the resources that are required to be able to build something, frankly, this flashy. It's a very, very expensive way to build, sort of important, just lots of different directions. You could just build anything and put the line render over the top of it. We've been asked that about Newport. Was it ever rendered? Well, there'd be a brown tide mark along the bottom of it. I suspect probably not. Don't go to that trouble of picking deliberately contrasting stones just to cover it over again. So to Gilbert's motivations, we've got the disproportionate river defences, which can be explained by way of the fact, well, Gilbert's one of the most powerful people in the kingdom. Certainly after he's offered the king's daughter's hand, he's turning on the crown, prolific castle builder. There's absolutely no way that Gilbert would have been satisfied with anything but an impressive castle on what's effectively his most visible lordship as we cross the River Usk into Gwynthiwr and Glamorgan, or travel up the River Usk into the heartlands of Gwent as well. There's absolutely no way we'll have had a timber castle or an archaic Norman keep on that site by the middle of the 13th century. So circumstantially, there must have been a clear build anyway. Stupendous engineering. I keep banging on about, but I can't stress it enough. They have built it in the bottom of the world's second highest tidal ranging river. Which again is not cheap, and it's making a point as well as being something of necessity. It's on the strongest side of the castle, horrendous sticky river mud. It's a show front, effectively. Got the complex geometric forms. We move from circular to a whole series of polygonal towers flare castles with the architectural embellishments of the times. We've got a variety of fine windows, generous latrine provision, which is well, extravagant at Newport. We've got lots of them in lots of different towers. Banded masonry, we've just looked at. Showpiece Watergate, in line with something the King's just done. And unusual domestic arrangements. So again, it's not a particularly conventional castle in that you've got a hall opposite the main accommodation. If you look at my top right frame, couple of entrances. You've got this slightly wacky gatehouse on the one side. it doesn't really work like a lot of other castles. And you don't have it. Where are the kitchen rings? Where's everything else? We really don't know, but it's certainly not set out like a conventional courtyard castle of its period. So it's possible it was never finished. You can look at a scenario where one Clare starts it, dies, finished off by another one, and then the rest of the castle, presumably after that, absent lords, they just don't finish it. There's no interest in it. The primary residences are always elsewhere. So the focus is put on finishing the riverfront facing across the lordship entrance by the bridge into town. If you came into town, this is your river bridge, and the bucks are picked out, bottom left. The final surviving arch of the town gate, you're entering the lordship, with the coat of arms above that as well. And this is your welcome to the Clare estate. It's a very, very imposing sort of portal, if you like, in the river gate there, floating or coming along the bridge. And it's very similar to Llanblethian, about 50 miles away in Glamorgan, unfinished Clare Castle. The first thing they do is focus on the landward show front. There are very similar features here where you've got a dominant gatehouse, two very large corner towers, and then passageways between the gate at two levels and the tower on the corner. It's got echoed in Newport, but sort of in mirror image. There you have it, castle on its bridge. So it is the portal to the Clare lordships, effectively, and what the portal it was. So why here though? Why does he make this that impressive? Well, first we looked at geography, and then circumstances of Gilbert's life. In 1282, sort of reluctantly gets sucked into the final Welsh invasion of Wales. Bit Keystone Cops and some of the accounts of Gilbert's campaigns. And unlike a lot of his contemporaries and colleagues were rewarded with land and lordships in the north, so you've got the Lacey and Denby, the Warren and Holt, and Mortimer's Chirk as well. They get new lands, new lordships carved out of Welsh territories. Well, Gilbert's got all of South Wales already. He's just taken the annex the uplands. So he's offered the hand of Joan of Acre, the 12-year-old daughter of Edward I at the time. Gilbert was already married. We have a long period then. It was a very, very different time in terms of social norms. So there's a long hiatus then before Gilbert actually becomes divorced from his existing wife, who lives out the rest of her days in Clare, in Suffolk, and then actually marrying Joan in 1290. In the meantime, following the defeat of the execution of Davies at Shrewsbury in 1283, Edward I embarked on a sort of itinerary through his newly conquered Welsh lands, sort of moves around the north coast. You can read his progress. I think there's a few translations of it, as far as I'm aware, and ends in the Glamorgan lands. And there's this line about him being received with the greatest honour and conducted the boundary of his lands by the Earl at his own expense. So Gilbert's there showing him what he's got and what he's done. They started, I think it's Kenfig, moved east to Ogmore, and then they ended in Cardiff for a couple of days, onto Caerphilly, and onto an unnamed castle, which is probably either Cardiff or possibly Newport, where conducted the boundary of his lands and out again. Very possible Newport is the place, and if it was, what did the king see? Did he see something under construction? He probably saw Caerphilly and was absolutely horrified at the sort of scale of Gilbert's ambition, which is why, again, he's trying to keep him close by offering his daughter in marriage. But at the same time, it might have been that Gilbert was embarrassed because he had a Norman keep with a bit of a palisade around it, but we need to sort this out at some point. 1295, decade later, Caerphilly certainly by then, probably 10, 15 years earlier potentially, the inner ward at Caerphilly is reoriented to face away from Cardiff and back towards Newport. The North Dam defences are added, which we'll see in a second. Gilbert's married Joan by making them third in line to the throne, and they travel to his estates by 1292. So, is it possible that the gatehouse at Newport is intended to receive a princess, Gilbert's new royal bride, in the sort of style which we've become accustomed? Certainly spends a lot of time in his South Wales estates after that. And there we have it, Caerphilly, the North Dam, West Gatehouse, slightly earlier, the bigger one faces this way, Cardiff that way, Newport that way, and then these are added. Polygonal towers, spur buttresses, all the same fittings and fixtures that you have at Newport in the first phases. And if you got off a boat, you meet embarked and disembarked in Newport, maybe spent the night in the lordship up above, meet the local dignitaries, 10 miles across country to Caerphilly, past the castle of Machen and its hunting reserves that the Earl will have certainly been built to some degree. And the first thing you see when you arrive would be the same sets of towers, but corporate architecture, if you like, of the Clare dynasty. So moving on from Gilbert, On the death of the younger Gilbert de Clare, 1314 at Bannockburn, the lordship's granted to Hugh Audley. So, Lord, the Clare lands are split between the Clare's three sisters and end up in the hands of their husbands, again, sexist times. And Hugh Audley, Stafford, he takes the lordship. This isn't recognised by Despenser, along with some of his neighbours' inheritance, receive the lands, and this leads to that sort of regional civil war that ends with, of course, unfortunate death of Edward II and Despenser, both of the Despensers, of execution following losing it, being on the wrong end of the fight with the barons of the region, and Audley's eventually reinstated. During this period, 1321, baronial force. So again, this is the case of I think the Bowens and the Biggards are involved in this. I think the Bowens are, I think the Biggards are dead. I think the Bowens, Caldecott, take the castle by force. Don't know exactly what happens there, but this is the key line. I'll highlight it in red because quite a few misconceptions have been brewed from this. Claims £2,000 worth of charters and muniments, a colossal amount of money in today's terms. That's the records of Newport Lordship are destroyed. That's how we document the evidence. Very, very similar situation at Caerphilly, same time. And the Crown provided 300 oaks for repairs, which again seems like an enormous amount of timber. And this has been read in the past as evidence that you have a timber castle at Newport on the river as late as that. But I think all of the circumstantial, historical, documentary evidence says otherwise, really. Audley regained the lordship in 1326, succeeded by his son Ralph. It was Hugh after that, funded the Austin Friars on the other side of Newport, which was briefly seen doing a shopping centre excavation a few years ago. First borough chart was issued in 1385. We have substantial accounts for the lordship during this period. We have Reed's accounts, we have court records. We have nothing, absolutely nothing accounting for the castle whatsoever. And there's not much evidence they spent much time in the area. The town's reaching its full extent by then. You've got the castle, tidal moat, an area refuted in late medieval documents as a great bailey, which seems to be on the side of this tidal creek, which might reflect out the bailey of the initial earthwork castle. There was a town wall. I've spent many hours crawling around basements, looking for bits of this, and jury's still out, but the line's quite convincing, with gates that survived in the 19th century, the one we saw on the print here, and sort of key and wharves, which are mentioned in other documents too, and the late medieval ship was found at this junction here. So, end of the century, you've got Edmund Stafford building a shire hall, a pinfold, stables outside in the Great Bailey, with various other churches. Certainly nothing whatsoever relating to a large set of masonry defences. And by the time we get to that date, 1390s, nothing there is convincingly of that period in the actual fabric of the castle itself. 1403, Owen Glyndŵr's revolt, or Owen Glyndŵr's sort of war of independence in South Wales by then. Castle and town are recorded as being refortified temporarily with a number of crossbowmen and then damaged, but then worth absolutely nothing at Earl Edmund's death a few years later, so presumably burned. And the returns from rents for the area then, like neighbouring Usk and Chepstow, just go through the floor. They're not making anything from the lordship itself, and the lands have been devastated. Repairs a few years later, back in royal hands after Edmund's death. The Great Tower is mentioned. You assume must be the tower in the centre with the water gate below it. And the gatehouse, again, the missing one somewhere in here, seen on an antiquarian plan. And then second key figure, and this is all very well documented. Jeremy Knight's the best starting place for this in Monmouth Antiquary, I think 1991. You get a series of accounts for the Duke of Buckingham, Humphrey Stafford, one of the sort of colourful characters of the age, substantially investing in the castle. He actually spends time in the lordship, unlike some of his predecessors. So we hear of a set of accounts for a few seasons' work. They're incomplete of the tower next to the bridge. So this is probably this refacing. What we think is Dundee limestone in Bristol, certainly not a local one. New windows, big windows punched through, but the rear embrasures, these all look 13th century. Comes Duke of Buckingham 1444, and then really ups the ante. We hear of work on the Chapel Tower. Again, we've assumed that this structure is a domestic building. Where is the chapel? Is it one of the corner towers? Is it this? We've got these ecclesiastical sized windows on an east-west alignment. There's also a piscina on the floor above the stub of the third floor. Another building called a camera retractor, which Jeremy identified as an anteroom to the one side of the main tower. We'll see in a second. The North Curtain Wall, or what was left of it. This was visible on photographs before the council flattened it, raised by 3 feet. There was architectural evidence for that. And then various sort of sundry repairs to roof, stables, doors, and locks, which could have been anywhere effectively. We started with the central tower, 3-story building, smashed through, knocked through into one big upper room, giant windows. Either side, quite heavily restored by the ministry in the early 20th century. They'd been blocked, robbed, blocked again, robbed out again. You can see the general height of them, very elaborate tracery formerly as well. And there's the early fabric of the castle, the 13th century up to about here, at least, and then sort of secondary build there. So what they did, effectively knocked the room into one big one. So it's a very elaborate setup of a very, very fine vault. It's a fan vault. Beautiful. I'm trying to zoom in so you get the PowerPoint. You've got a fan vault with rose bosses on it. You have these statue niches to either side of the main window, glazing rebates in here. So again, it's a glass one, so it's got the church level of architecture. And see this rather wonderful vault. In terms of parallels for this, drawn attention to an early publication by Rick on Macclesfield Castle, the former gatehouse of the fortified mansion bishops up there, which exists in a box now in the local museum service. And you have a smaller version of this effectively stacked up in some crates in Cheshire, but with an identical set of motifs to the Newport one. So, it's recorded as being built by Humphrey, and there's another one we've got in the museum that was. And we get this quite vivid account of works to the central tower. So we've got lime mortar from Bristol, limestone from Liswarian Tower, which is just in the lordship, to the other side of the river. They're bringing coal from Bristol, which is quite interesting, given that you've got the Welsh valleys a few miles away. Sea coal for lime kiln, Wellows Pill, just down from the town centre. Castle Well providing water for mixing things. Cornish snakes, 180,000. A huge number. Again, if you're putting 2 towers and a great hall back together, that makes sense. Lead from Bristol, pressed tiles from Cardiff, wallstone from Stowe, which is the hill behind the castle, and then 89 pieces of Dundee stone for the parapet. So whether these are copings or you've got some sort of finials on it, we don't really know. They're long gone, and then timbers from the lordship. So again, as with any great building campaign, they're grabbing things wherever they can. Reconstruction by Chris Jones-Jenkins of how it all worked. Go back a bit actually. So what is this building? Jeremy concluded, and I'm inclined to agree with him, probably didn't work as a chapel because he's got something on the floor above. So the tower's effectively been converted into one giant state chamber. Go back 2 more. Great archway in the inner wall, which is here, facing out over your public room, and then this sort of reception room where the Earl might have sat in state at one end, sort of the camera of the castle, and then these 2. Jeremy's posit is a robing room, like this camera retractor of the record. You've got these 2 ante-rooms leading you through into the great chamber, and the Lord, presumably Earl, so he's sitting in state, undergoing his taking on his lordship business of the day, the rents, the disputes, and so on. Possibly great events with Jasper Tudor and used to bride in here. And this is probably the room that would have happened if it happened in Newport Castle. It's the grandest room in there. You think of sort of earlier parallels like Knaresborough Castle, where you've effectively got a 2-story polygonal throne room with benches around the walls of an antechamber there. So public gallery behind and a sort of very lavish private chamber, sort of statue niches to either side. And the reconstruction, most of the back of this is entirely gone, and the dock underneath. We've got a few problems in how it all functions. You can put a window in, affecting the full height of the outward facing wall. Still got a portcullis slot in front of it, so it begs the question of whether the portcullis was still functioning. A huge multi-pane glass window with delicate tracery, an equally massive portcullis behind and in front of the thing. How did all that quite work? How did it function? And then another thing, you can see they added a turret to the back of the tower. We've lost all of the other details of the 13th century building, so a new stair turret giving access to this additional story up above, and then you've got people coming out the dock sideways. There's no evidence for how you got out of the Watergate if you floated in there. Presumably to one side, but this is a sheer passageway. But possibly a bit of archaeological evidence to be explored there, but in very wet, difficult circumstances. And then the tower next to the bridge was also refurbished. So again, very grand windows of the pews, segmented headed arches. You've got the high medieval sort of 13th century window embrasures below, and then up above they've been completely replaced by these sort of more elaborate 15th century ones, rest heads. Very, very fine corbels for the roof of this, very elaborate timber roof mentioned in the document, and it was almost like hands holding a torch with the rebate, restored rebate for the vaulted timber ceiling. That's how it was refitted. And this is reconstructive in its pomp. Maybe could have been even more ambitious with the height of the extra story. But certainly gives a sort of impression of the sort of bulk and general sort of flamboyance of the structure in its prime, really. This was drawn for a failed scheme to turn the castle into a town museum in about 1900. Might probably have saved the back of it in the 1970s. Never brought to fruition. So that's that by the end of the medieval period. Got a castle in its borough, landward gatehouse, various town gates, ships might represent the Newport ship being put to rest in the middle of the 15th century. It was sort of a middle-sized, thrived medieval town with a wooden bridge leaning over the hill and the usual accoutrements of the town, with the parish church up on the hill above, the chapels inside, and the city inside. From then on, a few minor repairs are recorded. Edward Stafford, deeply flamboyant grandson, yet another Buckingham to get his head cut off. They all seem to do this as a family tradition for picking the wrong side in various national events. We have a refit of the tower next to the railway. See these almost Carnarvon arched windows. They've got big medieval mouldings on the outside. This one either side of the chimney breast. The whole tower, blocked window there, has been refitted and the floor shifted up a bit. She was from mullions here. He's a flamboyant man. He stockpiling stone at Newport for a building project that probably didn't happen. Lots of Dundee stone being brought over. But around the same time, began Thornbury, which is sort of probably you could argue the last hurrah for massive castellated structures in the southwest. Anyway, never completed anywhere near its intended scale, and some of the details are sort of hood molded windows aren't a million miles away from what you see at Newport. And intriguingly, the boat was out. A new barge was being built for the Duke. And we've also got records which have been explored by local historians looking at a canal dug from Thornbury Castle, or wherever it wasn't completed, from Thornbury Castle to the Severn. You can imagine the journey from one seat up to a still functioning Watergate in another one. So again, people getting around by boats are still a relevant way of moving around between your castles. And then Sunday repairs. Interestingly, Edward rebuilt the town bridge, blocking all river passage up the river to Killeen. So the older town then started declining quite rapidly as Newport sort of embargoed its trade. So, and that's the last clear additions we've got. The Herberts of Raglan leased a section of the castle, this tower specifically, in the 17th century. There's a Civil War siege, which again is one of these ones you read all the local history books, check the information, and then find that there's actually no evidence that any of this happened. Few shot balls were found. I've got just been going through one of these old ministry foreman's reports, which are just these impenetrable handwritten records of works happening to the castle. And they mentioned shot balls coming out of the rubble. But beyond that, during the Civil War, King Charles stayed at nearby Tredegar House, who had a clever repairer. Castle clearly wasn't the best place to stay if you were a king at the time, which obviously in decline, and subdivided between different tenants. And the Herberts, who'd taken this on, had built a much more impressive house 3 miles up the river at St. Julian's, flattened in the 70s with council consent, with its own Watergate and stairs leading down to a tidal creek there. We have a description of it, it's got a fair castle by most people, Leyland and so on. It's still an impressive building, but they mention the gradual decay of the building. And from there on, it's a picture of decline. The Bucks, as they often do, give us the best view of it in something approaching a state of completion, so we can see the corbelled parapets we have on the rest of the castle surviving. A bit of one here, more of that, and at higher level. They also seem to give that memory of a much higher curtain wall between the two principal towers. Lost a lot of tracery and bits in here. Cross loops, 1, 2, 3, and then the surviving town gate at the end of the bridge there. And that's as good as you see the castle in any image, really. From there on, it's a picture of gradual decay. This isn't Turner, but it's believed to be a copy of something he did. So the castle, the towers have been bricked up. We've got floors inserted with various openings. Not sure whether these turrets ever stood that high then. Could be artistic license. You get this idea that it's becoming more of a boatyard, boats shoved in the bottom of it. It's no longer sort of building looks habitable. A few years later, Newport's still a regional market town, part of the Industrial Revolution. So you can see this sort of rather sylvan scheme of the ruined castle sitting amongst countryside. got this range of buildings. I've got quite a few views of butting onto the northern end of the castle, next to its northern gatehouse. Um, Tall ships in the background, the church is on the hill up behind. Again, it's not really an industrial scene, and this is shown in more detail here. The stone bridge actually completed. Got this mansion, which is possibly the Herberts in the 17th century, swept away by the railway. The first really big hit the castle took would have been at the end of the 18th century, the 1790s, when the Monmouthshire Bretton, crumbling arm of the Monmouthshire Bretton Canal, was driven through the back of the castle moat. So there's the river, the castle's in there. You can see this length of the canal through the back end of the moated enclosure. Now, it's almost impossible to imagine the navvies driving the moat, using the moat, allegedly filling up the ditches as well. That's referenced in the early 1820s, and not stealing half the back of the castle at the same time. So my first week in Cadw, I was summoned up to 14 locks, which is an incredible flight as you think of 14 canal locks in a row, taking the canal up quite a huge incline to the northwest of Newport. And the top two were being conserved under an HLF scheme. And so I think you've got some Newport Castle in view. Just about see to the right of the image here under my cursor. You've got a few blocks of Sutton limestone, purple sandstone from Stowe, big ashlars, got some Dundry stone from Bristol, Triassic sandstone from Sudbuck, bits of putlog holes in there, one with an iron bar. Clearly quite a bit of Newport Castle made it, I'm assuming floated up the canal. That's this old mill pond about a mile off the top left of my image here. So that's the first sort of major impact on the integrity of the site itself. By the middle of the 19th century, it had been divided up into a number of different industrial uses. There'd been a tan yard out the back, and quite substantial brewery was established. You can see the tower and the tower brewing process in the background here. So grain malt material at the top, working its way down to the bottom. And you can see that the building just wriggles with later windows, just punched through the curtain walls, absolutely honeycombed. All the openings are blocked, their facings are robbed out, and more windows inserted into them. So windows in the tower here have vanished, the corbel table's gone, arrow loops punched through to create a jetty, but it still sticks out the Usk now. And it's in a pretty bad way. Got windows built, roofs built on lowered walling as well, so presumably these all been cut down to take the roofs. And this is the Still and Herring Brewery, right at the end of the castle's life. There's quite a literature. I was asked to give a talk on the Castle of Brewery a few years ago. Quite a lot to say about it and how it actually functioned. And there's a whole world. You look outside of your own area of expertise. Start reading brewing books, and there's two chapters on Newport Castle in a book about brewing in Wales. It was quite a surprise, but unfortunately, they don't really describe the things we want them to describe. This was bankrupt by the turn of the 20th century, and after a fire, things were looking pretty bad. There's another one of this with charred timber sticking up. You've got vegetation. You can just see the level of intervention. You've got additional walls. You've got windows blocked up, huge gaping holes, and it was falling apart. This is a 1929 shot just before the castle came into care. The whole portfolio of these. The back of the site housing on it lost its inner defences. Effectively, this facade and whatever was left of the courtyard underneath the buildings. And by that time, Newport Corporation were very, very keen to be using the site for something else. This was one of the foremost coal ports in the world. And having that as an eyesore, the word eyesore is used frequently throughout the newspaper clippings. They wanted to use it as a coal yard, a cinema, some sort of technical college, you name it. They thought of pretty much everything. They were absolutely desperate to flatten the castle. But unfortunately, they only owned this tower at the time. This belonged to the Great Western Railway, who saved it from their own destruction here. Intriguingly, looking at the base of this tower, heading far further down, you can see it now. So I guess it probably matched the one by the bridge. And then the rest of it, Lord Tredegar, Morgan Tredegar Park, had the rest of the site and the rear. And this is a talk in itself, which I won't even attempt to embark on now. But long and the short is, you've got a Ministry of Works, Office of Works, who were broke. They'd had the first few tranches of guardianship monuments coming into their care from, the Rochesters and the Dunstan McCastles to the Hadrian's Wall. Just name your guardianship monument, England, Wales, and Scotland. So you've got your London-based Office of Works and First Inspectors of Ancient Monuments looking on, think, well, this is absolutely terrible, but we can't afford to take this on with spending a fortune everywhere else. And at the same time, then you've got Newport Corporation doing absolutely everything they can to acquire the site and then flatten it. And they're pretty honest about it. And then the third party with Morgan of Tredegar, sort of, again, grandson, some great antiquarian, Davies, who drew the first plan of the castle that we saw earlier on, who needed to sell. They were on their uppers, but at the same time, went against their principles to sell it to cast the character they knew were going to take it on. So the hero of the piece, in between the prevaricating office of works and the dastardly corporation, was a man called Mr. P.F. Ryder, who was Newport, was the Tredegar Park Estates agent, the land agent. And he acted almost as a sort of Machiavellian go-between. They've got huge piles of letters on file, with Ryder playing one side off against the other, implying that the council are going to go further than they suggested, or implying that the ministry would be more keen to take it on if the council did X, Y, and Z. And eventually, after being scheduled in sort of 1915, prevent the council from summarily flattening it, you could still demolish a scheduled monument then. But we just have to ask for permission to be allowed to do it. It came into state care in the 1920s, and the programme of works that had been drawn up 10 years previously was enacted after that. But here you have it, Plague of Locusts. This is one of the only works photos I've got in Newport Castle, which we have many, where I think nobody on this is smoking. Every other one, they've got something hanging out of their mouth, sitting swinging off, terrifying looking scaffolding further up. I mean, no hint of the safety standards we've got today. Very, very lightweight, bare minimum. And by necessity, this was a major intervention. The work started in 1934. To a scheme, we've got the original specification and brief, lots of cement, but also lime mortars for facing in places. The classic Ministry of Works cement mix being graded into the walls from height. Drastic by necessity, because after looking like this for so long, the building was at the point of collapse. Lots of wooden lintels holding up large chunks of masonry, windows that have been dug out, so nothing other than bits of wood supporting them. And the foreman who works for the area first refused to send his staff in there. Somebody will die, can't do anything with it. So it was a case of trying to get the whole thing stabilized as quickly as possible just to stop it falling down. And by necessity, that involved some really brutal measures. So effectively shuttering the walls off, grouting liquid cement mixes in from up above, which, today's standards, we would never, ever do this. You get this problem where the sandstone's softer than the stuff that's sticking them together and the faces of the walls just burst out with the moisture. But it saved the castle. It's very, very easy to criticise in retrospect. So you see all sorts of measures here. We've got top one of the hall arches. You've got some original masonry that I showed you earlier, way down, and then he completely rebuilt it. Took it down 10 courses or so, the top of these arches, because the walls above were riddled with vegetation. They were falling off, so substantial areas of refacing necessitated. There's quite a comical note on file where the proprietor of an antique shop across the road offered them a copy of the Buck print, saying, "Well, this might help you if you want to put this back." Which whether they took them up or not, we don't know. Some quite incredible pieces of scaffolding too. There's a whole 4 or 5 pages on one file in the 1940s of, will the scaffold up like stand in the river mud? Well, they obviously did. We were about to do a tiny piece of work on this piece of wall, and it's going to cost us tens of thousands of pounds using rope access contractors, because the scaffolding would be astronomical to rebed 20 or 50 stones. Again, the ingenuity of the workmen back in the day, good night shot. And you can see the extent that they had to intervene in the Great Hall alone. So you've got original masonry face exposed here, little patches, bits of the decorative course, again, large areas of replacement stone. And personally, I doubt the form that these windows were put back in. Very, very limited evidence. And I think they match the central tower windows a little bit too closely. I think there may have been an assumption they look just like them. We've got other issues like the great halls in here. You've got another window in a room where my cursor's running. You cannot see internally the junction between the two buildings or rooms. So again, they've just uniformly faced over original features, which is a major problem. But we've still got a castle. If we took this on now, it would be 10 years of our budget to deal with it. Just the river working alone. So work was finished. Went back just after the war, finished on the tower by the bridge, leaving a consolidated ruin. We've got lots of records of digging out the rooms while this was going on, with bits of stray walling popping up, of which we know nothing. We can't contextualise. So maybe this is the 12th century castle, where they were the 12th century castle or the earlier 13th century one, hiding beneath the later buildings. But apart from knowing that the lads were digging this out this week, that's all we know. So you can see it set in a bit of a dip. And as a sop to the council, who were sulking because they didn't get to flatten it, they were given the plot of land behind the castle, the curtain wall, probably where my cursor's running. The original curtain wall is probably where my cursor is now, way out here. The street had been punched through the line of the canal by then. So quite a substantial area of grounds. I have a colleague who was an American child, who used to come to Britain, to Wales, to Newport to visit his grandparents in the 50s and 60s and watch the town Christmas tree lights being turned on Castle Green. And this became the main outdoor space in central Newport, burgeoning industrial city. This is an early plan of what could have happened, and this would have been a fountain and a statue to the alderman that had spent most of his career trying to flatten the castle in honour of him sitting out the back. And you can see the stub of the northern gate and the piece of curtain wall that survived over there. At the time, this was dismissed by my predecessors as being inappropriate, but I look at it now and think, well, if that would have been there, a more elaborate pack, would a scheme like this have come into fruition, which is to basically just drive a road through the back of the site. You've seen this before. Ring Road, like name your British city, Nottingham, Coventry, and so on. Newport had its own example. About a third of the medieval town levelled to an inner distributor road, and the blue corresponds to bits sort of flattened. So we lost any sign of archaeology associated with the Lamb Gate recorded in the 19th century. Other gatehouse taken out. The tree, very elaborate set of latrines and drains, really out into the ditch and down into the river here. And the last surviving piece of curtain wall. And this, you've just got to laugh at the photo clip on the left-hand side. It's the Western Mail from 1972. As the demolition works are carrying on, and it's Mr. Robin Wilkinson, 23, of Beechwood, Newport, sorts through some of the rubble as he's demolishing Newport Castle to make way for the old green interchange. And the interview's brilliant. He's a local lad. Yeah, I love history, me. And there's the opening line of his quote as he's bulldozing the back of our castle. Maybe Stamford in Lincolnshire, the Demesne Castle at Rumney was levelled in the 80s, but this stands a pretty impressive piece of 20th century vandalism by any standards. And leaving us with this, with the castle sitting in a hole between the railway, right up against the North Tower, former ditch here, long gone, but possibly still under there, and the remains of its courtyard just obliterated by the roundabout itself, huge cutting underneath. Rather sorry sight. It's in good condition. We've had its annual quinquennial, 5-yearly quinquennial inspections, regularly treated for vegetation, bits of repointing happen, but there's a general consensus amongst the town that it's not good enough, that we could do more. The problem being, it's in a hole in the ground, isolated from all approaches to town by subways, which are horrendous places, long ones as well, and it's a sort of a magnet for antisocial behaviour, slightly out of I's way, as I mentioned, as I was trying to do the field work for this place. So a very, very sad state of affairs. And beyond that, it sits on our website with an incorrect description as well. Old castle, bit later in the 14th century, can't get in. So over the last few years, as a reporter and in a position to do something about this, I've been badgering away, and we've started a bit of an information campaign, really. So there'll be, as a prequel to the research I've been talking about being published in the next year or so, we're sort of looking at advanced drafts now. Put together an article for Heritage in Wales magazine, which will be, if you're a member of Cadw, you can get hold of it. I'm sure we'll find some way of being able to distribute that to ESG members at some point, according to what the magazine let me do. So this idea that we're providing a bit more information, summarising this gabbled summary. But the fun thing of being doing tours, and we think we've probably taken about 5,000 people around now in the last decade. And it's the South and Newport Museum working in partnership, and it's great. See Monmouth, where you turn up, you have the Civic Society will come and visit. The great and the good of Monmouth come to our tours. Newport, the whole town turns up. Every single section of society want to get inside the castle. Man with head injury at 9 o'clock in the morning. Bloke turn up on a quad bike stripped to the waist, barking at us one day. It's entertaining. It's a little bit hairy, but it's keeping the castle alive in people's memories, making it aware that we're actually interested and care about it. And the chink of light is this. The interchange, so about 50 years after the back of the castle was flattened by the council, the M4 Relief Road, circling Newport to the south, has been cancelled as on environmental grounds by Welsh Government, which has left a pot of money to try and improve access to Newport city centre, which at the moment, it's a bit of a chicken run, to be honest. You've got to go under, over, or around something. It's absolutely terrifying if you're not quite big like myself. I'm all right, but I wouldn't want to be much smaller. And it's to make it easier for people, elderly people on bikes, disabled people to get into the town centre. So they're looking at a major reorganisation of the existing road scheme, which won't put the missing bits of the castle back, but what they will do is bring it into a new levelled space. You've got even access with plaza-like pathways that we've got on the other side of the river by the Arts Centre. So the castle is potentially in a position we can do something about it. The exciting thing is I'm meeting Transport for Wales lead on Monday and the designers. Council have signed up for this as well. And we are looking between us and Cadw to try and put the castle back into some sort of accessible state, which is going to be very dependent on the logistics of how you lay out the streets around it, how you make it open and safe and visible and so on. So it's a case of watch this space really, but certainly from our point of view, it's a generational opportunity to put the castle back into, an acceptable state of access and accessibility and sort of visibility in the town and really regain its prominence. And then alongside that, and hopefully the journal article, we've got ArtCam space, but we've been letting them down over several years now until the years out. But we're hoping to get that done by the end of next year anyway. So that's pretty much a whistle stop of what we've got at Newport Castle. It's older than you thought it was, and it's quite a lot more interesting. Thank you.